So, if you've been taking note of the games that I like to play, um, I'm a big fan of real-time strategy games. Like, I'm basically an armchair general. I like shit like Age of Empires. Haven't played Vicky for a while, but like shit like that. Like, I'm a big fan of strategy. Like, how do we take over the land? Why? Because I'm a black person in the United States, and my people have no land. So, if you're a black revolutionary in the United States, the obtaining of land should be your number one priority. As they say in the New African movement, free the land. As Malcolm X said, a people without any land are not a people at all. Malcolm X didn't say that. I'm paraphrasing his thoughts on the question. But revolution is for peace, land, and bread. And you could have no peace and you could have no bread if you have no land. Hence the struggle of the Palestinian people for the return of the land that was stolen from them in 1948. So, um, there have been Maoist tactics at work in Palestine. Is the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian armed struggle, a Maoist movement? No, it is not. It is a progressive national liberation movement because the land of the Palestinian people was stolen from them by the Zionist entity, also known as Israel, and they are waging a just and righteous armed struggle to get their land back. So, communists divide wars into two categories. You have just wars, such as the war that the Palestinian people are fighting against the Zionist entity, and all national liberation struggles can be categorized as just wars. You also have unjust wars, which are wars that are fought, hello, comrades, which are wars that are fought for imperialist purposes to take away other people's land, to take away other people's resources, and to enslave their people. So the Palestinian armed struggle falls under the category of a just war. So, what did Mao say about the Palestinian struggle? Well, here's a document that was released in March 1965. He had a conversation with representatives from the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and he tells us, well, he told the PLO, and he said, everything is divisible. Since imperialism is a thing, it also is divisible and can be eliminated piece by piece. Chiang Kai shek's 8 million man armed force is also a thing which can be eliminated piece by piece. This is known as smashing the enemy one by one, which is the logic expounded in ancient books of Europe and China. It is very simple and has no profound logic at all. Don't read books, for who would ever bring a book to read when fighting? I would never read when fighting. Read less, for it won't do any good to read a lot. The battlefield is a school. Mao is a firm advocate of the fact that you can only learn warfare through fighting. You cannot learn warfare by sitting and reading books. I don't oppose military academies. They can remain open, but the school term should not be too long. It would be too long if it lasted 2 or 3 years. A few months would suffice. No Army, Naval, or Air Force Academy can be all that outstanding. Oh, this is dope. I read a bunch of Mao when I was with the FDP. That's one thing that was enriching about the experience. Which branch were you in? There are certain modern sciences which require a longer time to learn, such as guided missiles. Wichita, I remember them. Such as guided missiles and atomic bombs, which must be researched and manufactured. It does not take long to train soldiers in the use of weapons. 1 month is enough to train artillery troops. Several months or at most a year is enough to train drivers and aviators. This is okay. One of the principles of guerrilla warfare is that you do not rely on advanced technology, such as fighter jets and artillery and stuff like that, because you're probably not going to have that stuff. So if you could get hold to that stuff, yeah, by all means use it, but don't rely on its use. That's what a lot of Westerners don't understand about guerrilla warfare. You cannot fight a guerrilla war if you rely on advanced shit like that. I was holding that sneeze for about 2 minutes. So Mao had a saying: "The enemy is your quartermaster." Thank you. The enemy is your quartermaster. What does it mean when you say that the enemy is your quartermaster? That means that you obtain your AR-15s, your Finfouls, your whatever, your weapons of that sort from the enemy. As I mentioned last night, the Peruvian communists, the PCP, and the Nepalese and the Filipino communists, they started out with very little. Like they did not have China or any other state, the Soviet Union, whatever, sending them anything. So you can only get what you take off your enemy. So there's a story about Chuta, a very famous People's Liberation Army general. He obtained his first weapons with the use of nothing but a kitchen knife. Like he literally went out with the fucking kitchen knife. He killed a bunch of Kuomintang people and he took their guns, and that's how he armed his first troops. The principal thing is to train on the battlefield. During peacetime, training should be conducted at night. During wartime, learn by fighting. Haven't you said that you have read my articles? These things may not be very useful, but there are two principal lines. You fight your way, and I'll fight my way. The sentence, I'll fight my way, may be divided into two more sentences. If I can win, I will fight. If I cannot win, I will run away. Imperialists are most afraid of this method. So Israel was caught by surprise because bourgeois military strategists, they always think that, okay, we're going to meet on the battlefield and we're going to duke it out. Your guys against mine. No. Guerrillas abide by the principle, if I can win, I will fight. If I cannot win, I will run away. Israel was caught totally by surprise. So this was a campaign. The Al-Aqsa flood had been planned for a very long time. They did not just all get together one day and be like, you know what? Let's go fuck up Israel. No. Like they planned this shit, and they have spies within the IDF itself, feeding them information. So that's another guerrilla tactic. You can use the enemy's technology and the enemy's hubris against them. If I can win, I will eat you up. If I cannot win, I will run away, making it impossible for you to find me. In the beginning, we used guerrilla warfare in both offensive and defensive operations. The basic method was guerrilla warfare. When we were fighting Chiang Kai-shek, we moved from small battles to large battles. Later, we used 300,000 troops to wipe out his 500,000 troops. We used 3 fingers to bite off his 5 fingers. We were a minority, so how could we eat them? We did it piecemeal. The result is that we swallowed them. So that was Mao Zedong's thought on the ongoing war between the Israeli occupation and the Palestinian people. Kings and Generals, one of my favorite YouTube channels, non-political YouTube channels. Well, everything's political because I'm a Maoist and I recognize that fact, but they at least strive for some semblance of objectivity. So, the Israel-Hamas war, what we know so far.
On the morning of October 7th, Israel awoke to a shocking attack by Hamas. In the past few days, the world has witnessed the most significant escalation of the Israel-Palestine war since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. As of October 10th, thousands of civilians and combatants on both sides have already been confirmed dead, and the death toll will undoubtedly only rise. Due to the gravity of unfolding events and the sheer scale of violence, this is already much bigger than another short-term burst of confrontation. It is yet another full-scale war between Israel and Palestine, which has the potential to alter the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. Welcome to our video about the war between...
So you saw rockets and you see these little red zots down here. These are ground units. And these blue zots are the bad guys. So rocket salvo to soften them up. And note that they were able to penetrate as far as Jerusalem with these things. So again, use what you have. Use what you have. Use what you can build in your garage. Use what you can build in a place like Gaza City. And don't rely on outside support. Note how they always frame this as though these are two militarily equal powers. Yeah, but you also saw the jets coming to bomb the shit out of Gaza and Khan Yunis.
Israel and Hamas, where we describe the situation on the ground and look at what can happen next. This video is made possible thanks to the generous support of our YouTube members and patrons. Their contributions are the backbone of our work. At around 6:30 AM local time in Israel, Hamas, formerly known as the Islamic Resistance Movement, currently governing over the Gaza Strip, launched a massive barrage of some 5,000 rockets on Israeli cities to start its Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Simultaneously, they destroyed Israeli observation towers and weapon systems on the border by launching drones modified to carry explosives.
Modifying technology to use, modifying technology for your own use. That's another principle of Maoist guerrilla war. I'm going to draw heavily from this piece, Basic Tactics. The definition of guerrilla warfare. When it is not advantageous for our main land army to meet the enemy in large-scale engagements, and we therefore send out commando units or guerrilla units, which employ the tactics of avoiding strength and striking at weakness. Main thing. Avoid strength and strike at weakness. Of flitting about and having no fixed position, and of subduing the enemy according to circumstances. And when we do not oppose the enemy according to the ordinary rules of tactics, this is called employing guerrilla tactics. And Westerners and bourgeois military strategists, they don't like guerrilla tactics. They say, oh, this is inhumane. This is using, ignoring human rights whatsoever and all of that shit. Like, they never talk about how the Israelis ignore human rights, how they have kidnapped over 1,000 Palestinians for no reason and are now holding them in prison. They focus on the civilian hostages. Why did Hamas take civilian hostages, aka prisoners of war? For one, there's no such thing as an innocent settler. And for two, avoid the solid, attack the hollow. Avoid strength and strike at weakness. They're not going to march through Tel Aviv like they do in Gaza City when they do their military displays. They're not going to do that because they're not stupid. These people have been fighting for almost 100 fucking years. They're not stupid. So they're going to avoid strength. And they're going to strike at weakness. What is weakness? All of these little kibbutzes and stuff like that, where you have people that can be easily taken. They're right by the border, and you can easily bring them back into Gaza. At a time when our country's national defense preparations are not completed, when our weapons are inferior to the excellent equipment with which the enemy has provided itself, well, in Israel's case, with which America, us, has provided them, we must observe the following principles whenever we wish to wage a battle with the enemy. We must not attack strong positions. If the enemy guards his position firmly or defends a strong strategic point, then unless we have special guarantees of success, for example, you have somebody that is integrated within a strong position that can weaken this position, then we must not attack him. If we attack him, we will waste considerable time, and our losses in killed and wounded will certainly be many times those of the enemy. Moreover, in guerrilla warfare, our artillery is not strong. The artillery that the Palestinian resistance has is those, they have the rockets. They launched 5,000 of them, okay? That's a stand-in for artillery. So the Israelis are scared shitless of these things. So they already have a psychological victory because, nobody wants to be hit by a rocket. If we recklessly attack a strong position, it will be very difficult to take it rapidly at one stroke, and meanwhile, it will be easy for the enemy to gather his forces from all sides and surround us. On this point, the army and the people must absolutely be firm of purpose and cannot act recklessly in a disorderly fashion because of a moment's anger. So basically, plan your shit out. Do not fight hard battles. If we do not have a 100% guarantee of victory, we should not fight a battle, for it is not worthwhile to kill 1,000 of the enemy and lose 800 killed among ourselves. Especially in guerrilla warfare such as we are waging, it is difficult to replace men, horses, and ammunition. If we fight a battle and lose men, horses, and ammunition, this must be considered a defeat for us. So,
this enabled Hamas militants to use paragliders to fly over the border and enter Israel. The
catching the enemy by surprise.
Breach of the
that's like principle number one of guerrilla warfare. Israel knew nothing about this. That's why Netanyahu is in fucking trouble now. They're like, what the fuck were you doing? And I've seen many, many interviews from settlers who are like, we don't trust the IDF anymore because, they didn't know that this stuff was going to happen. How the fuck? All of the equipment you have, all of the money you receive from all over the world, how the fuck did you not know these people were getting ready to attack us? So the Palestinian resistance accomplished a remarkable coup in the initial days of the invasion.
The border fence was complete.
Well, reconquest, rather.
When other Hamas members blew holes in the fence moments later using explosives. Hundreds of militants entered southern Israel on motorbikes and cars.
Speed and mobility. Motorbikes especially.
Hamas also conducted
The cartels in Mexico use them a lot. Like when you think about like cartels and gangs, don't think of them as just like unorganized, okay? Especially in the third world, these lumpen criminal groups are extremely organized. I read one bourgeois theorist who basically told us to consider them as light infantry, so to speak.
an amphibious landing near Zikkim. On October 10th, the Israeli military claimed that roughly 1,500 Hamas fighters were killed during the incursion into Israel, which shows the scale of the incursion. The head of the military wing of Hamas, Mohammed Daif, stated on the first day of the attack that it was in response to the Israeli occupation, the desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the killing of Palestinians. However, there is an opinion
Again, just war.
that the motivation behind the Hamas attack was to shock the Israeli public and show that the Palestinian issue has not been resolved. Another motivation was to dissuade Arab countries like Saudi Arabia from signing normalization agreements with Israel. The Israeli government
So again, war is politics by other means.
and the army were caught completely unprepared. It is very difficult to understand how the Mossad intelligence agency had missed preparations for an operation of such magnitude, although Gaza is under uninterrupted surveillance by Israel.
The power of the people is greater than the power of the man's technology.
Egyptian officials had reportedly warned the Israeli government about the preparations of Hamas for something big, but since the information was not concrete, it was ignored, and according to the Israeli government, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was not informed about it. The Israelis were expecting trouble in the West Bank due to the recent wave of violence, and concentrated most of its standing army there, leaving
Idiots.
the Gaza border
Again, hit where the enemy is not. The enemy is here, so you attack here. Avoid the solid, attack the hollow.
practically undefended. Numerous media reports quoting sources from Israel claimed that they simply did not expect any escalation from Gaza. Merely 10 days before the start of this war, Israel reached an agreement with Hamas through intermediaries, reopening the border crossing and allowing Gazan laborers to work in Israel.
AKA the proletariat.
On the first
Like, people don't understand, like, the political economy of Israel is heavily centered around Palestinian labor. Okay? Like, the settlers, they're not going to work. They're not going to be building roads and bridges. They're basically making the Palestinian people work for their own operation. And another thing, like, why the fuck would you build cities right next to your open-air concentration camp? Like, they're basically asking for it. And then you allow laborers through this crossing here. So you're allowing spies in. So spies and saboteurs that can come in and fuck your world up. Out of shape Brooklynites, essentially. I mean, they're still dangerous because they have fucking guns, but yeah.
day of the hostilities, Hamas militants breached the border fence in 7 different locations to infiltrate more than 20 Israeli border villages and cities. At 10 a.m., the Israeli military reported that Hamas had penetrated several military installations, the Erez border crossing base, the Zikkim military base, the Nahal Oz military base, and the headquarters of the Gaza division. Militants captured Israeli tanks, armored vehicles, and other types of equipment. Hamas also took over the police
Again, the enemy is your quartermaster. Don't rely on Iran to send you tanks. Go steal them from the enemy.
station in Sderot. The Israeli military was caught entirely off guard and did not have nearly enough soldiers to repel the Hamas attacks. This left civilians in many Israeli localities and communities practically defenseless against the terrorist attacks of Hamas.
I'm sorry for calling these people objective, but anyways.
Hundreds of civilians
From a military standpoint, like from just a basic trade standpoint, they're good, but yeah, don't trust them on politics.
including children, were killed indiscriminately in Sderot, Ashkelon, near Oz, Be'eri, Kfar Aza, Netiv HaAsara, Ofakim, and other areas near the Gaza Strip. At least 260 participants of a music festival near Re'im were massacred. Hamas roamed
They shouldn't have held a music festival next to the world's largest open-air concentration camp.
the streets, shooting civilians outdoors or in their homes. They burned houses, wreaked havoc, and terrorized the people until the Israeli soldiers arrived to fight them back. As of October 13th, over 1,000 Israeli civilians were killed and more than 3,000 were wounded. According to Hamas, some 150 Israelis and foreigners have been taken hostage in this attack. In these attacks, some Hamas militants reached as far as 24
Sderot and Ashkelon were a village and a city populated mainly by Palestinians, but after the Nakba, all of them were expelled and now Israelis live there.
kilometers from the border, and that shook Israeli society to its foundation.
Yeah, that was part of the purpose of the escalation. Like, if you have a settler colonial entity occupying your land, yeah, your goal is to shake it to the core and eventually shake it apart so that you get your land back.
Full extent of the massacre of civilians Hamas perpetrated is unknown. A few hours after the start of the Hamas attack, the Israeli government started to act. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel was now at war, started by Hamas.
Really, Hamas started the war. You had nothing to do with starting the war. Nothing whatsoever. You're just there. You just sprouted from the ground like a pumpkin, and you had nothing to do with the decades-long war that has been going on between yourself, your people, and the Palestinian people. Nothing whatsoever. You're totally innocent. You're just a little small bean, Bibi Netanyahu.
Israeli civilians near the Gaza Strip were evacuated. The mobilization of 300,000 reservists was ordered, as the standing army units were sent to expel Hamas militants from the infiltrated areas.
Oh, expel. Never heard that before in the discourse about the history of this region.
The Israel Defense Force, the IDF, reported the launch of Operation Iron Swords, aiming to eradicate Hamas and other radical groups in Gaza.
And the purpose of this operation is not to eradicate Hamas. It apparently is to eradicate the entire population of Gaza.
Israel's Security Cabinet declared the adoption of a series of operational decisions aimed at bringing about the destruction of the military and governmental capabilities of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Israeli government decided to cut the supply of electricity, fuel, water, and goods to Gaza. By late October 8th, the IDF retook control of all areas infiltrated by Hamas, although they did not rule out that some militants might still be present near the border areas.
So, cause an uproar in the east, strike in the west. So, like our friends over at KNG said, they were expecting more violence in the West Bank, okay? Because there had been an upsurge in violence in the West Bank. They thought Gaza was basically pacified. So there was definitely coordination with groups in the West Bank. Again, caused an uproar in the east, and the strike came in the west. When the enemy wants to attack a certain place, that does not advance there directly, but makes a detour by some other place, and then changes its course in the midst of the march in order to attack and disperse the enemy. The thunderclap leaves no time to cover one's ears.
It is clear from the statements of Netanyahu, his government, and the Israeli military that their intention is to completely wipe out Hamas and eliminate any threat coming from Gaza. Netanyahu has called Gaza the City of Evil and promised to turn all the places Hamas is hiding in and operating from into a ruin.
Imagine if a Palestinian person said this about Israel.
Recommended residents of Gaza to leave now.
This is actually one of the basic enemy strategies of trying to combat a guerrilla war, because that's what the Palestinian people are waging. They're waging a guerrilla war against Israel. There's three ways that you can successfully combat a guerrilla war. The first way is crude. It's outright genocide, which is currently what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza. Basically, eradicate the fish and drain the ocean so that the people cannot swim, so that the guerrilla fighters cannot swim among it. That's why they're, total annihilation. That's why they're bombing Gaza into into a giant hunk of concrete. Second way is to evacuate, like make all of the civilians leave. And Israel fucked up because they allowed their civilians in air quotes, of course, to basically live right up on hostile territory. I mean, that they had military bases and shit like here and here, but like, why would you allow, like, there should be like okay, say I'm an Israeli general, which is never going to happen. If I go to Israel, I'm likely to be shot in the fucking head. Anyways, say I'm an Israeli general. Like, I would have like this whole little strip here depopulated. Like, nobody gets to live here. Nobody gets to live here. That's fucking dangerous. Like, I would allow them to maybe live here, and the rest of this should be filled up with soldiers. Noted Israeli general BRG. The MAGA comms were basically calling me a Zionist earlier because I'm like, why the fuck are you all supporting Erdogan? Erdogan is not going to shut off oil to Israel because Erdogan only cares about Erdogan. Okay, he doesn't care about Palestinian people anymore than he can shore up his immensely stupid base at home and continue to do what he's doing, which is assist in the genocide of the Kurdish people in his country, along with the genocide of the Armenian people, courtesy of Azerbaijan in the zone of Nagorno-Karabakh. So Erdogan is not going to assist the Palestinian people in any substantive, material way. But I digress. So yeah, they basically fucked themselves. They got so arrogant that they really allowed their supposed civilian populace to live right up on the Gaza border. That's stupid because when they attack, because the enemy, one thing about the enemy is that they eventually make a mistake. Okay, whether it's the British in Ulster or the Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, or the Boers in South Africa, or the Americans in the United States, they are inevitably going to fuck up. And we as revolutionaries have to be ready to exploit their fuck ups politically and in other heavy ways. And that's what the Palestinians did. They looked across the border fence and like the Israelis fucked up at opening up this checkpoint and letting people come in, because one thing that settlers are is addicted to the labor of the people that they're colonizing. Like, why do you think the Boers did not wipe out native South Africans? Because they needed somebody to work. They came to South Africa to get rich. They did not come to South Africa to work. Same thing. Israelis did not come to Israel to work. Rhodesians did not come to Rhodesia to work. Brits did not go to Kenya to work. They went there to steal land and enslave the local populace and make them rip wealth out of the ground on their behalf. So Israel would collapse if it wasn't for Palestinian labor. So they will never, ever, ever completely wall off Gaza, wall off the West Bank, because that can't happen. They need people to do the grunt work while they sit in nice air-conditioned offices. They also have a habit of importing Filipino and Thai and other Asian workers to work in their houses and do other types of grunt labor. But they can never replace the Palestinians because there's millions of them and you can only import so many people to a country.
Gaza has been under blockade by Israel and Egypt for more than a decade, and Cairo has stated it is going to allow 2,000 refugees per day, which is a paltry number considering Gaza's 2 million population. The Israeli defense minister has called Hamas militants human animals and told his soldiers in a broadcast that he was lifting any restrictions on their actions in Gaza. The IDF spokesman
basically giving them a blank check to commit any type of war crime that they want. Like, there's a saying in the movement, okay? Accusation is projection. Basically, we are going to take the things that we are doing and put them on the enemy. So we behead babies, but we're going to say that they beheaded babies. And I even saw a stupid person saying that that the Palestinian resistance put a baby in the oven. And then a Palestinian came back and said, no, this is what you all did in 1948 during the first Nakba, with documented proof. So all of the shit that Israel is accusing the Palestinian people of doing, that's shit that they've been doing. That's shit that they've done. The rapes, the torture, the every war crime under the sun, the Palestinian resistance is actually extremely, immensely disciplined. The Israelis, on the other hand, are basically gun thugs, just like any other settler army of occupation. Like Trump said, they're not sending their best. Like, this is not the prime of humanity here, okay? Most of these people are conscripts. Conscripts are notably ill-disciplined. So when you have a war like this, it's going to be your conscripts, your draftees, like America used them in Vietnam. And the American army in Vietnam was notoriously ill-disciplined. You had soldiers shooting their officers. They called it fragging. Immense use of drugs and alcohol. You had theft, looting, smuggling, and never mind war crimes committed against civilians like the My Lai massacre. So, yeah, they're gun thugs. This is not a disciplined or trained army.
Person Daniel Hagari has stated that the emphasis of the Israeli shelling of Gaza is on damage and not accuracy. The statements of
the emphasis of the Israeli shelling of Gaza is on damage and not on accuracy.
Israeli officials clearly...
So basically genocide. Oh yeah, I forgot the third method of combating guerrilla warfare. Co-optation. Israel has no interest in co-optation. They do have their pet Palestinians, but like their goal is to destroy and take the rest of the land. That's why they allow settlements to crop up all over the place in the West Bank. The UN has condemned that, but they don't give a shit what the UN does. The Secretary General of the UN literally called for humanitarian relief. Okay? Their ally is increasingly demanding a ceasefire. Well, certain elements within the government of their ally, the United States, and they don't give a fuck. We've been calling for a ceasefire for what, 2 weeks now? And what did they do? They went right in and they cut the internet and the phone off, and they just started going ham on the entire Gaza Strip. And there's also been increase in Israeli instigated violence in the West Bank. So they don't give a fuck. So when you're fighting an enemy that doesn't give a fuck, you also have to not give a fuck. That's another rule of guerrilla warfare. So co-optation is basically when you buy off the masses. Like if they're demanding, if they're joining the guerrillas because there's no land reform, if land in an entire country is owned by like 10 families, then you're going to give them a phony land reform. If they want schools in their community or paved roads, you give them schools and paved roads. But Israel is not going to give Gaza or the Palestinian people anything but death. But that's the third way that bourgeois military strategists think that you can defeat a guerrilla war. Of the three strategies, removal, co-optation, and expulsion, co-optation is probably the most historically successful. And we see this counterinsurgency at work in the United States. Like after every rebellion, what do? They select the most liberal, bourgeois inclined leaders, again, leaders in quotes here, and they dump money on them and they make them the face of the movement. That happened in Ferguson. That happened in Minneapolis. They will also throw token reforms. Defund the police was one. Okay, we're going to take away the police's petty cash. Oh, look, we defunded the police. Or there's a horrible jail in your city. Like at STL, there was basically a gladiator ring called the Workhouse. I call it a gladiator ring because they literally made inmates at this facility fight in the middle of summertime for a glass of, well, not a glass, a Dixie cup of ice cold Kool-Aid. They were taking advantage of the horrible conditions in which these people lived and fight. Make them fight. Otherwise, and if you lose or if you refuse to fight, they throw you in the hole. So, yeah. Sderot, that city just outside Gaza City, is where Israelis sit on cliffs to watch Gazans get bombed. Yeah, they deserved whatever happened to them. Our FDP local chapter, I think, got turned into free refrigerators. I don't hate that, people getting fed, but it does seem kind of, I don't know, lesser than our revolutionary goals and just another charity. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. There's been a struggle within the Maoist movement on like the utility of stuff like that. If it feeds people, I mean, by all means, but don't act like that is the sum total of revolutionary activity.
Demonstrate that they intend to retaliate against Hamas in the most forceful of ways, which could exacerbate the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has acknowledged Israel's legitimate security concerns, but also urged them to conduct military operations in strict accordance with the international humanitarian law.
International humanitarian law is a joke. Israel doesn't abide by it. The United States doesn't abide by it. Nobody with power abides by it.
As of October 14, Israel has not started the ground offensive on Gaza, but it seems inevitable. For now, the Israeli military has been pounding the Gaza Strip heavily and regularly causing massive destruction. The Palestinian Ministry of Health claimed that 1,600 Palestinians, including 600 children, have been killed by Israeli shelling and airstrikes, and residential buildings, a hospital, and other civilian facilities have been destroyed. Several Hamas leaders have been reportedly killed in the airstrikes so far. The Hamas representative, Abu Ubaidah, vowed to respond with the execution of a hostage every time an airstrike hits Gaza.
This hasn't been happening, by the way.
So far, this has not dissuaded Israel from
most of the hostages that have died have been, no, pretty much all of the hostages that have died have been killed by their own government, the Israelis.
Shelling Gaza. The words of the Israeli officials indicate that the shelling will continue until they deem conditions sufficient for a ground assault. Hamas has also been regularly launching rocket barrages on Israeli cities. Civilian areas in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Ashkelon, Herzliya, and many other localities have been targeted.
They should mention that the Israelis are targeting civilian areas in Gaza.
The Israel Air Defense System, Iron Dome, specifically designed to counter short-range missiles, has so far been largely successful in dealing with Hamas shelling. But the sheer number of rockets launched on Israel makes it practically impossible to destroy all Hamas rockets, which
again, taking advantage of the enemy's weakness. Like they can't that like those missiles, those counter missiles that they shoot to shoot down rockets, are very expensive. So you can't just fire those things willy-nilly. So what they're doing, what the Palestinian rebels are doing, what the resistance is doing, is they're shooting so many that the Iron Dome cannot intercept them all.
Have resulted in casualties among Israeli civilians. Israel looks determined to retaliate against Hamas as strongly as possible. The ground assault on besieged Gaza looks like a matter of time, as Israel keeps rolling its tanks closer to the war zone. Israeli officials have warned the public to prepare for a long war, as the complete destruction of Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza would be a grueling and costly task. Hamas has a network of underground tunnels that it can utilize to survive the Israeli airstrikes, along with inflicting as much damage as possible on the IDF. Any long war has the potential to escalate beyond the borders of the battlefield and spill over to other countries. Netanyahu has claimed that Israel's response to an attack from Gaza will change the Middle East, without elaborating on what exactly that meant. The United States has expressed its unequivocal support to Israel, promising military aid and ordering the newest USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier and the Ford Carrier Strike Group to sail to the shores of Israel, with another carrier group rumored to be joining it soon. US President Biden has strongly warned
Jakar, link me to that.
Against any third parties joining the war against Israel.
But it's okay for Delta Force to be chilling out. These people are such fucking hypocrites.
Any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of the situation, I have one word: don't. Biden most probably means Iran, or Iran-backed Hezbollah operating from Lebanon. So far, both parties have offered their complete support to Hamas, but do not appear likely to directly join the war, at least in the short term. Both Israel and the United States have downplayed the claims of Iranian orchestration behind the Hamas attack. Nobody doubts that Hamas is backed and sponsored by Tehran, but so far, the official statements indicate that there is no evidence to prove the direct and hands-on participation of Iran in the attack on Israel. Still, Iran's supreme religious leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has warned Israel that attacking Gaza will bring a greater calamity to Israel. Iran will be happy to draw Israel into a prolonged war without having to directly take part in it. But this does not rule out using its proxies, like Hezbollah, to create a second front for Israel at some point. So far, Hezbollah has been careful, and apart from several artillery and rocket exchanges, the northern front has been quiet for Israel. Hezbollah's direct involvement in the form of a ground assault against Israel may lead to heavy retaliation not only against Hezbollah, but possibly against Iran as well. Such a scenario would be a major escalation of the war in the Middle East, potentially leading to an incredibly risky situation. Thus, Hezbollah's attack against Israel does not seem imminent at this point, which does not mean that it won't happen, particularly if the war is long indeed. Hezbollah is much bigger and more powerful than Hamas. It has tens of thousands of militants in its ranks, along with thousands of rockets and a certain reputation for
What are my thoughts on Warhammer 40k? I don't know, I've never played it. You all ask me the most random shit.
managing to keep the IDF at bay in the 2006 Lebanon War. Therefore, Israel will keep a large contingent of its army on the border with Lebanon to be ready for any incursions from Hezbollah. The sides have exchanged fire since the start of the war, and there were additional claims that Israeli positions in the occupied Golan Heights were under fire too, so it is a good idea to keep looking for developments on this front. We are still in the first days of the war, started by an unexpected and devastating attack by Hamas on Israel and its civilians. This is the biggest escalation of the Israel-Palestine conflict since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. There have been more than 5,000 civilian and military casualties already on both sides. Both Israel and Hamas are bracing for a long war, which has the potential to draw in other countries and reshape the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. More episodes on this topic are on the way, as we collect more information as we go, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member.
Alright, so, yeah. I don't know if they'll make another video on it. I mean, I think they will. So, the principal object of the action of a guerrilla unit in dealing the enemy the strongest possible blows to its morale, which the Palestinian resistance has done very, very well. They scared the shit out of Israel. Like, they were not expecting this. The Israelis were going about their daily lives, sitting up, doing Israeli things, and next thing you know, a guy is flying in a lawn chair with a fan and a piece of cloth on the back of it coming to fuck you up. So, having raves outside the prison walls and shit, yeah. So, on that ground, they win. The Palestinian resistance won on the level of giving the enemy the strongest possible blows to his morale and creating disorder and agitation in his rear. What this means is, okay, we want to see protests. We want to see desertions. We want to see fighting within the enemy's armed forces. We want 90% of Israelis blaming Netanyahu for the fact that they were just attacked. So again, they get an A on that scale in terms of creating disorder and agitation in his rear. In the first days of the attack, you had Israelis rushing to the airport, going wherever they could, like they were scared shitless, and drawing off his principal force to the flanks and to the rear. So you've got a shitload of Israeli troops by the West Bank. You've got a shitload of Israeli troops by the on the Israel-Lebanon border. So what this means is drawing off his principal force to the flanks to the rear. You want the enemy to stretch himself out. You want him to spread himself thin so that it's easy for your smaller force, for your 30,000 guys and an undetermined number of Hezbollah troops, if they get involved. Nasrallah is giving a speech next Friday, I believe. But you want to make it easier for your boys to eat up their boys, in slowing and stopping down his operations, and ultimately in dissipating his fighting strength so that the enemy's units are crushed one by one, and he is precipitated into a situation where, even by rapid and deceptive actions, he can neither advance nor retreat. So they're doing this ground invasion now, okay? They're starting a ground war, but they don't understand that Gaza is better understood by the Palestinian people who they have confined there than the Israelis, who have most of which have never ever been to Gaza. Okay, yeah, they've got maps, they've got satellite images, but like on the ground, you don't know. Never mind the fact that you've basically churned it up by bombing it into oblivion for the past week. Actually, for the past going on a month now. Like we're moving up on the month anniversary of the Al Aqsa flood operation. So they're fucking up the ground. So I would not want to be an IDF conscript getting ready to go into Gaza City. Yeah, that's one of my favorite movies, Enemy at the Gate. So he can either advance or retreat. It's going to be hard because you don't know what the situation looks like on the ground, like from the ground. Like I said, I would not want to be an IDF guy in Gaza City right now. Destroy railroads and highways within the area of action. The enemy has done this pretty well. The Israelis have done this pretty well by bombing the fuck out of everything, as well as important structures along the roads. Destroy the enemy's storehouses of food and military equipment. Destroy the enemy's principal or secondary supply depots. The Palestinian resistance raided those military bases, so you probably got a pretty long supply line and all that. Strike at the enemy's rear, at his baggage train, or at his mounted and unmounted couriers, as well as his mounted scouts, etc. Also seize the provisions and ammunition that the enemy is bringing up from the rear to the front. This only works if you have people in the rear. People in the rear, gay joke. Destroy airfields and military depots of the Air Force in the enemy's rear. Mobilize and organize the popular masses everywhere and aid them in their own self-defense. So, those are the tasks of your guerrilla unit. This is a very, very technical piece. Like, Mao was obviously writing in the middle of a war. Apart from the rifles of the infantry and the cavalry, light machine guns, hand grenades, etc., guerrilla units should also be supplied with pistols and submachine guns. So, you look at videos of the resistance fighters who actually made the invasion of Israel, who made the reoccupation of Israel, so to speak, and they were mostly armed with these pistols, submachine guns, small arms. To the extent that the terrain permits it, one can also add heavy machine guns, mortars, and small cannons. The role of mortars and small cannons is the rockets, occupied by the rockets, rather. So yeah, that's basically my analysis using basic tactics. Again, this is not guided by Maoist theory, but certain of these, if not all of these, tactics are universal. Like this is how you fight a guerrilla war. So this is basically an ABC rundown of developments. This was put out on the 19th of October, but like timeline and key developments of the Israel. They keep calling it the Israel-Hamas conflict. That pisses me off because it's not just Hamas. Anyways, reading this stuff like you kind of get used to reading between the lines. So, key developments. The attack began on the 7th of October at 6:30 in the morning in Israel. Air raid sirens began sounding in Jerusalem around 6:30 in the morning, warning citizens of the attack in progress and to immediately take cover. An estimated 2,200 rockets were fired towards southern and central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, by the Hamas militants, according to the IOF. Then, simultaneously, armed Hamas militants, many on motorcycles, stormed blockaded areas of the Gaza Strip. Israeli jet fighters launched retaliatory strikes in Gaza. The Al-Susi Mosque was destroyed, along with a high-rise residential building. 30 Israeli police were killed in the fighting. So, like, look, this is what Israel has done to Gaza. So, can you imagine being an Israeli conscript fighting your way through this shit? Like, there are so many places to hide. You could put snipers in this back here. You could put mines under this rubble here. Like, this shit isn't being cleared. Like, they're basically walking into a death trap. So, they're going to be fighting. The Israelis are going to be fighting on enemy territory. And more Israeli whining. And the tunnel systems are real. So yeah, if you talk to Vietnam vets, like the tunnels scared the shit out of them. Like they were more afraid of the tunnels than anything else, because like a motherfucker could just pop up behind you, blast your buddy, and then disappear back underground. Same thing. The Japanese used tunnels in World War II in certain islands in the Pacific. Like that is nasty, brutal fighting. You're already flanked before you know it. Exactly. So, like, imagine you're walking through the rubble of Gaza City, and your buddy tripped the mine a block back, but you're continuing your patrol and whatever else they have you doing. Next thing you know, you get popped in the fucking leg, and you don't know where it's coming from. Like that plays hell with your mind, and that is what ruins the morale and coherence of units. Never mind what these conscripts already think about what they're trying to do, anyways. So, like I said, I would not want to be an IDF conscript getting ready to go into Gaza right now. So let me go back to the beginning here. How is it that the barehanded masses banded together in ill-armed military units without guns and bullets, are able to charge the enemy, kill the enemy, and resolutely carry out effective action in the war? This is a very widespread and very reasonable question. But if we know the functions of the weapons used by an army and the aim of an army's action, we can then understand how our popular masses, although barehanded, still have weapons and can engage in actions to subdue the enemy. All methods we must be willing to, like, all these methods are methods we may be unwilling to utilize or able to employ. If we really want to get rid of the enemy, there are weapons for us everywhere and work for us to be doing at all times in order to ensure effective united action by the army and the people. I was just wondering if rural warfare is essential to Maoist protracted people's war. Common error. Like, no. The tactics that can be found in this reading and in Maoist history in general apply to urban conflicts as well. Um, there hasn't really been much theorization of urban protracted war, and most Maoist led movements are still predominantly rural, like in the Philippines and India and Turkey. But the shit that we're seeing coming out of Gaza, and never mind the fact that like Syria has been in a civil war for the past 13 years. You had the IRA, which fought in a primarily urban context, a primarily urban theater. So it's possible to apply protracted warfare tactics, protracted people's war tactics in urban areas. But again, concrete conditions. Gaza is basically like there is no there is no rural area in Gaza. So any conflict being waged out there is going to be urban because like that's what they are. And there is another piece, any man wall, the urban guerrilla, Carlos Marighella. He was not a Maoist, but this is interesting because he was interested in waging armed struggle, and he was Brazilian, and Brazil was the property of a military dictatorship for quite a while. So, what is an urban guerrilla? Okay, because that's essentially what Hamas and the Palestinian resistance is, an urban guerrilla movement. Marighella tells us the urban guerrilla is a person who fights the military dictatorship with weapons using unconventional methods, aka Maoist methods. A revolutionary and an ardent patriot, he's a fighter for his country's liberation, a friend of the people and of freedom. The area in which the urban guerrilla operates is the large cities. There are also criminals or outlaws who work in the big cities. Many times, actions by criminals are taken to be actions by urban guerrillas. That's extremely important to understand because when you are, Brazil has fucking terrain. Everybody has fucking terrain. Um, anyways, the idea that the urban guerrilla is no better than a criminal, like when you hear the mainstream media talking about the Palestinian resistance, they always talk about supposed war crimes and other horrible things that have been done. And that's an essential thing to burn into the heads of the masses if you are a reactionary, if you're part of the occupation government. You have to associate in the mind of the masses revolution, rebellion with lumpen criminal activity. The urban guerrilla, however, differs radically from the criminal. The criminal benefits personally from his actions and attacks indiscriminately without distinguishing between the exploiters and the exploited, which is why there are so many ordinary people among his victims. The urban guerrilla follows a political goal and only attacks the government, the big businesses, and the foreign imperialists. So, can we say that the actions that have been carried out by the Palestinian resistance, especially the taking of hostages, is justified? Yes, because said hostages are settlers. So they are affiliated with the foreign imperialists because they are foreign imperialists. Even if they were born in Israel, they are carrying out designs that serve the Israeli bourgeoisie, the Israeli ruling class, and the United States. The urban guerrilla is an implacable enemy of the regime and systematically inflicts damage on authorities and on the people who dominate the country and exercise power. The primary task of the urban guerrilla is to distract, to wear down, to demoralize the military regime and its repressive forces, and also to attack and destroy the wealth and property of the foreign managers and the Brazilian upper class. So, he's laying out what exactly the purpose of an urban guerrilla is. Personal qualities of the urban guerrilla. The urban guerrilla is characterized by his bravery and his decisive nature. He must be a good tactician and a good marksman. The urban guerrilla must be a person of great cleverness to compensate for the fact that he is not sufficiently strong in weapons, ammunition, and equipment. The career military officers and the government police have modern weapons and transportation and can go anywhere freely using the force of their own strength. The urban guerrilla does not have these resources at his disposal and leads a clandestine existence. The guerrilla may be a convicted person or one who is out on parole and must then use false documents. The urban guerrilla has an advantage. While the military and police act on behalf of the enemy, whom the people hate, the guerrilla defends a just cause, which is the people's cause. The urban guerrilla's weapons are inferior to the enemy's, but from the moral point of view, the urban guerrilla has an undeniable superiority. This moral superiority is what sustains the guerrilla. Thanks to it, the guerrilla which can accomplish his principal duty, which is to attack and survive. The urban guerrilla must possess initiative, mobility, and flexibility, as well as versatility and a command of any situation. Initiative, especially, is an indispensable quality. It is not always possible to foresee everything, and the urban guerrilla cannot let himself become confused or wait for instructions. His duty is to act, to find adequate solutions for each problem he faces, and to retreat. It is better to err acting than to do nothing for fear of making a mistake. Without initiative, there is no urban guerrilla warfare. So, the Palestinian people have those qualities in spades. Surprise. To compensate for his general weakness and shortage of weapons compared to the enemy, the urban guerrilla uses surprise. The enemy has no way to combat surprise and becomes confused and is destroyed. When urban guerrilla warfare broke out in Brazil, experience proved that surprise was essential to the success of any guerrilla operation. The technique of surprise is based upon four initial essential requirements. 1. We know the situation of the enemy we are going to attack, usually by means of precise information and meticulous observation. Again, the Israelis fucked up when they opened that crossing back up because they were definitely bringing in more than workers and grunt labor. They were bringing in people who were going to suss them out. And like I said, this is a dilemma for settler regimes. Like every settler regime, whether it be the Boers in South Africa or the Rhodesians or the Brits in Kenya or any other settler colonial state that has fallen, they have relied heavily on native labor. Said native labor, whether they be Palestinian or Shona or Hosa or any of these other groups that are oppressed and exploited, they know more about you than you know about them. You do not know their language. You do not know their language. You do not know how they live. And but they have to know your language. They have to know everything about you. You've got them working in your house. You got them building your roads. Like, why the fuck would you have people who hate you, whose land you stole, building your critical infrastructure? They're going to work in some shit to make it collapse really fast. And they are going to report back to their boys in Gaza or their boys back in the native town, hey, this is what they're doing. So when you hit them here. That is the dilemma of every settler colonial regime. Like, you know that these people want to destroy you, destroy your state, but you cannot live without them. That is why you do not set up settler colonial empires. 2, we know the strength of the enemy we are going to attack, and the enemy knows nothing about our strength. Attacking by surprise, we save and conserve our forces while the enemy is unable to do the same, is left at the mercy of events. We determine the time and place of the attack, fix its duration, and establish its objectives. The enemy remains ignorant of all this information. So the Palestinian resistance, they did not just go into Israel and be like, okay, we're going to chill here for a little bit. Well, some of them did. Like, one thing that you're doing that you do not do when you are fighting a guerrilla war, never, ever, ever let yourself get barricaded into a house or a police station, okay? Like, you do not establish a fortress. That was John Brown's big mistake. Well, he made many mistakes. He's still probably the best white man in American history. Anyways, he holed himself up in this they call it John Brown's fort. I think it was an engine house or something in Harper's Ferry. But like him and his boys holed themselves up in this like little bitty building, and they're like, "Here we are, come get us." And the Marines eventually broke down the door and dragged them all out and hanged them. So never, ever, ever allow yourself to be barricaded, okay? Like, we make the enemy run. And if we cannot make the enemy run, we run. John Brown wasn't the best tactician, but his moral clarity was unimpeachable. You need both to win a war, though. There's actually a really good book. It's called Fire on the Mountain. It's about, like, if John Brown had actually won. Mobility and speed. By carefully carrying out operations that last only a few moments and leaving the site of mechanized vehicles such as the motorbikes and cars that the Palestinian resistance used, the urban guerrilla beats a rapid retreat, escaping capture. The urban guerrilla must know the way in detail, and in this manner must go through the schedule ahead of time as training to avoid entering alleyways that have no exit or running into traffic jams or being stopped by traffic signals. So, yeah, like I guarantee you, most of those fighters, like, they had been in Israel before, like they had worked in Israel before, so they knew where they were going and what they were doing. So, it's interesting how he defines terrorism. Um, Terrorism is an action usually involving the placement of an explosive or firebomb of great destructive power, which is capable of affecting irreparable loss against the enemy. It requires that the urban guerrilla should have adequate theoretical and practical knowledge of how to make those things. So my take on that is that things that wantonly harm civilians should be avoided. Every time the IRA did something like that, it turned public opinion against them. But in war, there's collateral damage, but that should be avoided as much as possible. So what are these 7 sins of the urban guerrilla? The first sin is inexperience. The urban guerrilla, blinded by this sin, thinks that the enemy is stupid, underestimates his intelligence, thinks everything is easy, and as a result leaves evidence that can lead to disaster. I don't think the Palestinian resistance is guilty of this. They are very experienced. They have been fighting for decades. So we cannot accuse them of inexperience. The second sin of the urban guerrilla is to boast about the actions he has undertaken and broadcast them to the four winds. This only applies to individuals. Your organization is definitely going to broadcast them to the four winds because that is good propaganda. Um, this is an error because when you boast about things that you have done, you make it easy for you to be captured and for horrible things to happen to you, such as being tortured to death in an extremely brutal way. The Palestinian resistance did not do this because if they were boasting, Mossad, and they said in the K&G video that Gaza is under basically 24/7 high-tech surveillance, so they did not commit this sin. The third sin of the urban guerrilla is vanity. The guerrilla who suffers from this sin tries to solve the problems of the revolution by actions in the city, but without bothering about the beginning and survival of the guerrillas in other areas. The Palestinian resistance is not guilty of this because the West Bank and Gaza see themselves as brothers and comrades, which they pretty much are. The fourth sin is to exaggerate his strength and undertake actions for which he, as yet, lacks sufficient forces and the required infrastructure. The Palestinian resistance gets an A on that. The fifth sin of the guerrilla is rash action. The guerrilla who commits this sin loses patience, suffers an attack of nerves, does not wait for anything, and impetuously throws himself into action, suffering untold defeats. That has not happened. This action was not rash. It was meticulously well planned. The sixth sin of the urban guerrilla is to attack the enemy when they are most angry. The seventh sin of the urban guerrilla is to fail to plan things and to act spontaneously. Again, this was not the case. The government has no alternative except to intensify its repression, like they bombed Gaza immediately after the attack. The police networks, house searches, the arrest of suspects and innocent persons, and the closing off of streets make life in the city unbearable. The military dictatorship embarks on massive political persecution, political assassinations, such as bombing people when they're in their homes, and police terror becomes routine. The people refuse to collaborate with the government, and the general sentiment is that this government is unjust. I mean, yeah, the people of Gaza witness injustice every day. You literally have to pass through an enemy checkpoint. The West Bank as well. You have to pass through a fucking checkpoint to get to the rest of your land, and you can stand on the border and look at your ancestral village, which some jerk from New York is living in. So, yeah, the Palestinian people are not going to collaborate with Israel. And they recognize fully that the Israeli government is unjust. It's incapable of solving problems because the Israeli government is a problem, and that it resorts simply to the physical liquidation of its opponents. The political situation in the country is transformed into a military situation in which the guerrillas, aka apes, appear more and more to be the ones responsible for violence, while the lives of the people grow worse. So yeah. The role of the urban guerrilla in order to win the support of the population is to continue fighting, keeping in mind the interests of the people, and heightening the disastrous situation within which the government must act. These are conditions harmful to the dictatorship which permit the guerrillas to go to open rural warfare in the middle of an uncontrollable urban rebellion. It's kind of ass backwards in the case of the Palestinian people, but Marghella was working in a radically different context. So yeah. So the blueprint when you're waging an urban guerrilla war is basically the same, but the tactics are different. So that's pretty much all I have for tonight. To wrap up, is the Palestinian resistance a Maoist guided movement? No, it has a heavy Islamist core. But the PFLP and the DFLP in particular are communist formations. And being communist formations, they've read their Mao. So they know the importance of catching the enemy by surprise, the importance of uniting with the masses. Like there's a very cute video of militants receiving candy from people during their parade. This wasn't during this recent war. This was a few years ago. But it's obvious that the fighters and especially the martyrs had the love of the people of Gaza and the West Bank. So that's extremely important. If there's anything that you could take away from Maoist military tactics and strategy, it's that you have to have the support of the people. If they did not have the support of the people, they would not be able to go into Israel and they would not be able to go into Israel and get information. They would not be able to have spies in the IDF. They would not be able to march through Gaza and receive the love and adoration of the people. The Palestinian people have nothing to rely on but their armed resistance, but their sons and daughters. Yes, there are armed units of women who are participating in the Palestinian armed resistance. They have nothing to rely on but their own force. People are talking about what Turkey is going to do, what Iran is going to do. These states only care about their own geostrategic and geopolitical goals. So the Palestinian people, especially the resistance, have taken many lessons from Mao because they find themselves in a similar situation. They find themselves occupied by a harmful, and antagonistic group of people. They find themselves occupied and their land stolen by a group of people who are dedicated to their complete destruction. So they've studied Mao, but it's not a Maoist movement. But Mao taught us things through his experience and the Chinese Communist Party during their struggle against Japan and the KMT and the other imperialists. They learned things through experience, and the price of oceans of blood that all oppressed people can learn from. So there's 3 stages of protracted war. I'm going to wrap up after this. So you have the strategic defensive. That's basically when the war just pops off. The enemy just took your shit, and you are getting your shit together to fight them back. Strategic stalemate is when the strategic defensive is also the longest period. I would say that they are still at that stage right now in Palestine. The second stage is strategic stalemate. That is the transitional period of the entire war. It will be the most trying period, but the most pivotal one. The stalemate is basically we're like this. We're pushing, but we're really not moving. Whether China becomes an independent country or is reduced to a colony will be determined not by the retention or loss of the big cities in the first stage, but by the extent to which the whole nation exerts itself in the second. If we can persevere in the war of resistance in the united front and in a protracted war, China will in that stage gain the power to change from weakness to strength. It will be the second act in the 3-act drama of China's war of resistance. The third stage is the counteroffensive, the strategic offensive, if you will. The recovery of lost territories. That's basically when, you know what, we're ready, let's go. Mao said that not until we fight our way to the Yalu River can this war be considered over. So what would a strategic offensive look like in Palestine? Okay, that's when Gaza and the West Bank are basically joined territorially. That's when, they're actually able to go blow for blow with the Israeli Defense Forces, and tens of thousands of casualties are inflicted on the Israelis. That's going to be the strategic offensive stage. And after the strategic offensive, you will have the establishment of a free, socialist, secular, one-state solution, Palestine. So, main thing is that protracted war is just that. Protracted means long, okay? 60, 70, 80 years. The Russians, they fought a protracted war. It lasted from the early 1900s all the way up to the mid-20s. The war was not over after the Bolsheviks staged a coup in Petersburg. You had a civil war after that, and the civil war wasn't over until the early 20s. So, it's going to be bloody. The war is not over yet. The war is not over until, as the slogan goes, all of Palestine is free from the river to the sea. But I'm going to link these 3 sources in the YouTube description. What's this? There's some definitely important differences. Chinese communists were already embedded in society, right? Like they hadn't been multi generationally rounded up in a giant concentration camp. I mean, that's not really a difference, is it? Like, are Palestinian communists not already embedded in their society? Like, they live right on top of each other. Like, every Palestinian knows somebody that has been murdered or dragged into prison by the resistance. Like, I would say that the resistance is extremely embedded in the Palestinian society because Palestinian society is nothing if not resistance. They have an entire culture of resistance since 1948, and this land was jumped on top of them. But they're not in Palestine proper. What do you mean they're not in Palestine proper? Like, where are they if they're not in Palestine proper? Anywhere that Palestinians live on their territory is Palestine proper. You mean the occupied territories, the Zionist state? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. They're inside a fence. Yeah, okay. But from within that fence is where resistance is being organized. Are you saying that it's not effective because they're not in the territory occupied by the Zionist government? Like, yeah, because they are not allowed to live there unless they forswear their Palestinian identity and become Arab Israelis. They don't want to do that, so yeah, they live in the West Bank or they live in Gaza. Accumulating forces, such as organizing the masses, is a failed strategy, right? You cannot wage a guerrilla war unless you've organized the masses. Who is going to wage the guerrilla war if not the masses? Like we are part of the masses. We are not distinct from the masses. You all got to read your Mao. Ah, I got you. That's saying that's different from the Chinese Communist movement. They aren't able to be as diffused across the land. Yeah, I mean you can say the same thing. Like kind of a similar situation to Ulster and the Republic of Ireland, but still they moved back and forth across the border as needed. Um, so like I said, the tactics are universal. They just have to be applied differently. Anyways, I'm going. I'm going to sleep. I hope you enjoyed this.